Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 21st of April. I'm Marit Gwyn, and you're watching Europe Today, your daily dose of live news and analysis here on Yoronews. Coming up today, EU foreign ministers gather in Luxembourg with the two conflict hotspots in Ukraine and Iran high on the agenda. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha will dial into the meeting, as will the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Nawaf Salam. We'll bring you the latest from our correspondent on the ground. Also, with the ceasefire in the war on Iran hanging in the balance and the next phase of peace talks uncertain, the Middle East is again on a knife edge. We bring you an exclusive interview with the UK ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. And Norway's Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide has told Europe Today that, quote, the road to a Palestine state will be under UN principles, after a conference in Brussels seen as a response to Donald Trump's controversial Gaza peace board. We'll bring you more from that exclusive interview during the show. And Ukraine's Zelensky has said the Druzhba pipeline will be operational again by the end of April, raising the prospects of restored Russian oil flows to Hungary and Slovakia. It could mean the imminent unblocking of the EU's €90 billion loan to Ukraine. But first, to our top story this morning, because EU foreign affairs ministers are meeting in Luxembourg this morning to discuss Ukraine, but also the Middle East. Three member states, Spain, Ireland and Slovenia, are expected to call for a tougher stance against Israel for what they say are clear breaches of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. We can now cross over, I believe, to our correspondent, Shauna Murray, who is standing by there in Luxembourg for us. Good morning, Shauna. Good to have you on the show. Ukraine obviously featuring prominently in that meeting today, and hopes there could be a breakthrough in the EU's financial support to Ukraine.
That's right, Mairead. A fairly momentous EU Foreign Affairs Council about to happen in the next few hours in the building just behind me here, where it's likely that there'll be a political discussion about unblocking the €90 billion loan for Ukraine, which, as we know, had been stopped by the Hungarian government, Viktor Orban, over a dispute in relation to the Druzhba pipeline, which is the pipeline that flows Russian oil through Ukraine to Hungary and Slovakia. It appears now that dispute is being resolved, and there will be an opportunity then for that €90 billion to go to Ukraine. But even more so for this Foreign Affairs Council, it's the first time it's happening since the Hungarian elections. And in the last one back in February, which took place the day before the anniversary of the fourth year of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Hungary was blocking not only the €90 billion, but it was blocking the access for Ukraine to the European Peace Facility, which allows the EU transfer weapons to Ukraine. It was blocking the passage of access to Ukraine to become a member of the European Union. And it was also blocking the sanctions package. So, EU foreign affairs ministers were furious at the time with Peter Szarto, the Hungarian foreign affairs minister, and he's not even showing up here today. So it seems like a new dawn in relation to EU, Hungary and Ukraine relationships. Marit?
And Shauna, if we can shift to the Middle East, obviously also featuring on the agenda. And there are three countries, Spain, Ireland, Slovenia, who want tougher action against Israel in response to the situation both in Lebanon and in Palestine. Tell us more.
That's right. A letter emerged from those three countries at the weekend calling for a stronger discussion within the Foreign Affairs Council about taking action against Israel for what it says are breaches of the Israel-EU Association Agreement. Now, it's likely that discussion will take place because what they're saying is even more has happened even the last year in relation to maybe Israel's assault in Lebanon, the war there, but also the EU has been very concerned about a law passed in the Knesset in Israel which allows for the execution of Palestinians convicted of murder but not Israelis, and that law has passed, although could come before the Supreme Court. But first of all, just take a listen to the EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas speaking about the situation in Palestine yesterday.
We can and must do more to ensure respect for human rights and accountability, to protect the Palestinian people and to put the two-state solution solidly on the table again. And this is the only way that both the Palestinians and Israelis can live in safety, dignity and peace.
EU Foreign Affairs Policy Chief Kaja Kallas speaking about the situation in Palestine, saying the EU needs to do more. But I've spoken to several diplomats from many countries over the past few days in relation to this, and it doesn't look like the EU will change its policy. First of all, to suspend even a part of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, you need a qualified majority, and that doesn't exist because even though Germany, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, has had a robust and intense conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel about the situation in the West Bank, Palestine, Lebanon and so on, it looks like Germany won't be changing its stance and won't be taking action. So therefore the numbers aren't there for even partial suspension, let alone a full suspension of this agreement. Marit?
OK, Shauna, thank you so much for that. And I know you'll be speaking to Luxembourg's Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Xavier Bettel. Later this morning, we'll bring you that interview from Shauna on tomorrow's show. But now, the Norwegian Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide was in town in Brussels yesterday to co-chair a meeting on promoting a two-state solution for Palestine. He spoke to our Europe editor Maria Tadeo shortly after that meeting. Maria started by asking him about the situation in the Middle East and whether he feared a return to hostilities between the US, Israel and Iran is the most likely scenario as the expiration of the ceasefire nears.
Well, these are different questions. If you look at Iran, I would say the difficult part is that the sides are far apart. I mean, first their demands are far apart, although they have been working on them. I think there's been some progress, but also because one party or the other party is asking the other party to do some of the things in the ceasefire before they go to the meeting. So my advice will be go to the meeting, talk to each other. On the good side, I think there is a motive in both countries, both in the US and Iran. The war was highly unpopular in the US and created a lot of havoc in the world economy. And I also think that Iran, who has been severely battered through the attacks, would like to avoid the continuation of war. So there is a motive, and let's all try to work to help them to go in the peaceful direction. This is not only an issue for the two sides, but it affects the whole world economy.
And what role for the Europeans? Because President Trump has expressed his frustration at the Europeans and NATO too, saying they have not done anything. This is a paper tiger. Without the U.S., they are not capable. What's your response?
Well, I believe very much in NATO. I believe NATO is good for all its members, including the United States. There are so many other things NATO does, and by standing together, we are defending the transatlantic area. But NATO is a defensive alliance. It's not an attack alliance. It's, there have been occasions where we have joined forces in entering into faraway battles, but that has then been well prepared beforehand. One has made the argument, and invited the allies, and collective decisions has been made. None of that was tried before the Iran war, so there was very limited appetite to be part of the war. However, many NATO countries, including my own Norway, is now dedicated to work on making sure that the Hormuz Strait is open and remains open, not as NATO, but as in the context of a broad coalition of interested parties who are third parties to the conflict, who are not fighting with either side, but who have a shared interest in protecting the principle of freedom of navigation at sea. So NATO countries are doing something, but it's not as party to a conflict.
But just finally, just so we understand, the reconstruction and the construction of a two-state solution, is that going to be handled by the Board of Peace with many legal questions around the role that President Trump plays, or is this an international UN-backed path?
So the road to a one unified Palestinian state will be under the principles established by the UN over many years, and there are many countries that are strongly dedicated. Remember that almost 160 countries have now recognized Palestine as a state. That is way more than 3/4 of the membership of the UN. So this is clearly the world's view on this. There has to be a Palestinian state. It still takes time, but we need to ensure that that happens in such a way that we have one unified Palestine under a solid democratic governance, able to live in peace with its neighbor Israel. And it's not around the corner.
The Israelis have said that not has been achieved, however. They say there's still terrorism operating and they have to live in security. Are you taking in their feedback?
So we absolutely want to make sure that the people of Israel can live in peace as well, and that they can be free of terrorism from their neighborhood. But then you also have to contribute to making your neighborhood a place where people like to live peacefully. So a two-state solution under the auspices of the Palestinian government, with the rights and responsibilities that comes by being a state, with adequate international support, should be precisely the neighbor and partner that would make it possible to live peacefully and not in eternal war for Israel. So when we, Norway, for many years have dedicated so much work to the two-state solution, we do it for Palestine, but we also do it for Israel, because we remain convinced that in the long run, this is the only viable solution for real peace in a very troubled region.
Maria Tadeo speaking to the Norwegian foreign minister there. As we heard from Shona earlier, Spain is leading calls for the suspension of the EU's trade and cooperation agreement with Israel over what it describes as persistent human rights violations. The proposal is not expected to get the necessary support from EU ministers. And this is not the first time the prospect of reviewing or suspending the agreement is raised by EU leaders. Our Jakob Yanes explains.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is on a mission and he won't let go. And today, once again, he will formally propose severing the EU's association agreement with Israel. Sánchez has accused Netanyahu of setting the Middle East on fire and has doubled down on his criticism of the war in Iran and Israeli attacks on Lebanon. The proposal has already hit a wall multiple times. Will it work this time? Established in 2000, the EU-Israel Association Agreement is the bedrock of the economic and political relationship. And for months, Spain, Ireland and Slovenia have demanded an urgent review. Now, a European citizens' initiative titled Justice for Palestine, with over 1 million signatures, is forcing the issue onto the agenda. Crucially, a possible suspension would not mean a full trade ban. About 60% of Israeli exports to the EU already enjoy zero tariffs under standard World Trade Organization rules. However, the remaining 37% rely on a special duty-free treatment granted exclusively by this agreement. Suspending it would slap sudden tariffs on Israeli machinery, medical devices and pharmaceuticals. And the EU is Israel's largest trading partner, with a relationship worth more than €45 billion a year. The European Commission estimates this would hit Israeli exports with an extra €227 million a year in duties and freeze millions in bilateral EU funding for ongoing cooperation projects. To fully scrap the deal, the EU needs everyone to agree. However, suspending just the trade privileges requires only a qualified majority vote. And although Israel has lost one of its staunchest allies in Viktor Orban's Hungary, and with Italy taking a harder line amid attacks on Christian places of faith, the proposal still faces an uphill battle.
Jakob Yanes there. Now, moving on, there are growing expectations, as we heard on the top of the show, that the rift between Hungary and Ukraine over the Druzhba pipeline could be resolved soon. Hungary's outgoing Prime Minister Viktor Orban has hinted he could drop his veto on EU financial support to Ukraine once the pipeline is repaired and is operational again. I'm joined for more by our Ukraine correspondent, Sasha Vakulina, who joins me in the studio. Good morning, Sasha. Zelensky gave an interview last night. When did he say that this pipeline could be back in operation?
There are indeed signs, Mara, that it might be back and running imminently any day now. Let's take a look at the timeline of what's been happening with Druzhba pipeline, which is indeed transporting Russia's cheap oil to Hungary and Slovakia. Now, it was damaged in the Russian drone attack at the end of January, and then on the 5th of March, Volodymyr Zelensky said it would take from 6 to 8 weeks for Ukraine to repair Druzhba. Now it's been 7 weeks since that statement. So there we go. This is the timeline, and indeed the expectations are that it might be up and running any time now. Hungary's Prime Minister-elect Peter Magyar said he hopes to have it back as soon as possible. What I can say to the Ukrainian president, although we have not spoken, is that this is not a game. if the Druzhba pipeline is in condition to carry oil, then it should be reopened as promised. And this is where it is this rare moment when Budapest and Kyiv are actually aligned, because this is exactly what Volodymyr Zelensky said indeed in that big interview you've mentioned to the Ukrainian television, when he said, for our part, we will fulfill what we promised by the end of April. The Hungarians, I think, will fulfill what they promised. They will unblock 90 billion. And the EU will fulfill what they promised, an agreement with the Hungarians, with the new government and with the others.
And in that interview, Sasha, Zelensky also outlining what he expects of the European Union now.
Indeed, there are a few other decisions that Kyiv is expecting to get unblocked. Now, first of all, of course, this is the new package of sanctions against Russia, also blocked by Hungary, but also there is EU accession process for Kyiv. And this is something that's been vetoed consistently by Hungary, by Budapest, even before the Druzhba pipeline got damaged in the drone attack in the end of January. Ukraine is expecting to have some clusters opened. This is the big veto of Hungary. And in mid-March, Ukraine and the European Union said that they are going technical process of unblocking those clusters and opening to make sure that Kyiv is doing all the homework to be ready for when the moment comes. And the big expectation for Kyiv is now that the moment has come indeed for that.
Okay, Sasha, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks. Thank you for that. We're moving on to the Middle East again now, with the ceasefire in the US and Israel's war against Iran due to expire tomorrow. President Donald Trump has said overnight it's highly unlikely he'll extend the truce unless a deal with Iran is reached before then. For more, we can cross over now to Dubai and to our correspondent there, Jane Witherspoon. Good to have you back, Jane. There were expectations of a second round of peace talks yesterday, also today. Where do we stand right now?
Good morning. Well, there are lots of conflicting information going around everywhere at the moment as to whether those talks will take place in Islamabad. It's a waiting game for now. Obviously, the Iranians are keeping everyone hanging on till the last moment with no clear direction as to what they're going to do. And we are, of course, less than 48 hours until that ceasefire deadline ends. President Donald Trump has vowed to maintain the blockade. He's also threatened to start bombing if an agreement is not made by Wednesday evening. Meanwhile, the Iranians have said that they're not prepared to enter into any negotiations under the shadow of threats.
And Jane, I know you spoke to the UK ambassador to the UAE about the situation in the Middle East yesterday. What did he have to say?
Well, I think this goes further than the British Embassy. I think everybody is in agreement that this needs to de-escalate. Everyone is in agreement that also we need to make sure that there's no further regional conflict and also global disruption. As you mentioned, the UK, the British Ambassador to the UAE is Ed Hobart. I sat down with him for an exclusive interview with Yoronews. He told me about the UK's stance on the war. He did also emphasise that there still is a risk for escalation, unfortunately, here in the Middle East.
The Prime Minister's been very clear that this wasn't the UK's war. Yeah. It wasn't something we wanted to take place. But particularly in defence of the Gulf countries, we have enabled the US to help support that defence through the use of British military bases in the UK and elsewhere. In terms of the Straits of Hormuz, what we want is the law of the sea to be followed, and for these international thoroughfares, which are critical to the global economy, not just to the economy here, not just the economy in Europe, but actually in particular the economy in the Far East, to be open and flowing. So we don't want blockades. We don't want Iran or others causing danger to merchant shipping in this region.
That was the UK ambassador to the UAE, and thank you so much, Jane, for that update from Dubai. But that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Europe Today. We'll be back with more news and more analysis at the same time, same place tomorrow morning. We hope to see you then, and we'll see you very soon here on Euronews.